One. All right. Welcome everybody to the Stock Sharks podcast. I'm the co-founder of Stock Sharks, JR Alexander. I have a very special guest with me today, CEO and founder of MindMed, JR Rahn. JR, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, and I'm glad to meet another JR. And the other crazy part is my middle name's Alexander. So
wow, this will get super confusing.
This is going to get really confusing, but I think I'll go by JR1 and you go by JR2.
That works for me. So our audience is pretty familiar with MindMed. I mean, you guys are on a pretty big tear stock-wise. We're not going to talk too much about stock today, more so about the company, so those who are unfamiliar can get familiar with. Just to give you my audience a quick background, MindMed is a company at the forefront of the new psychedelic medicine industry. They haven't wasted any time starting to build out a competitive advantage that's based around domesticating psychedelic chemicals into predictable and controllable medicines. MindMed hopes to use substances like psilocybin, an active ingredient in magic mushrooms, LSD, and MDMA, also known as ecstasy, for tough psychiatric conditions like anxiety, opioid withdrawal, seasonal affective disorder, and attention deficit hyperactive disorder, also known as ADHD. While treatments for these maladies already exist, many are not curative or completely effective in all patients. I get that right?
Some of it, not all of it. We are focused on, right now we have three drug development programs that are taking psychedelic medicines and bringing them through clinical trials. The first one is Project Lucy, which is going to be a phase 2B trial of LSD-assisted therapy for anxiety disorders. The second is a microdosing of LSD, and we're looking at that in a phase 2 trial for adult ADHD. And then the last commercial drug development program that we have is something called 18MC, which is derived from the psychedelic substance known as Ibogaine. And what we're trying to achieve there is really the antibiotic of addiction. And we'll be heading into a phase 2 trial on 18MC next year, 2021. We're just finishing up now some phase 1 studies on 18MC. These are large problems in society, right? The things that we are addressing in our commercial drug development programs. Mental health and mental illness and addiction, these are really, really big problems. 40% of Americans are suffering in the midst of COVID-19, a mental health issue or an addiction issue. That's a big amount of people.
It's only going to increase with these lockdowns getting more and more as we go. So first easy question for you, where did you get the idea for MindMed? What did you do before MindMed, and where did this all inspire to come up from?
Well, it's really a personal mission. It's not really necessarily an idea. I was struggling with mental health issues and addiction issues. I was suffering from alcoholism and a cocaine addiction. Okay. And a friend mentioned to me that I should consider psychedelic therapy. And so I took him up on the idea. I didn't think, it had much legs. When he first said it to me, I thought, Timothy Leary, 1960s, sounds scary, LSD. Well, it changed my life. It recalibrated my life. I was, at the height of my career in Silicon Valley. I was a former Uber employee. I went through the Y Combinator program with another startup and fintech company. But I was struggling on the inside with mental health and addiction, and psychedelics helped me. And so I came out of that journey thinking, well, why isn't this a medicine? Why is this not approved by the FDA? It's clearly helped me. We have all these massive problems in society, and more people are going to be out of work because of AI and automation. This was 2.5-3 years ago when I first formed this thesis, and it's all coming true. Unfortunately, COVID-19 happened, and it's even compounding these societal problems, even into bigger problems. And even you have the Lancet Commission publishing data saying that they believe that mental illness and mental health are going to cost the economy $16 trillion by 2030 in lost productivity. So big problems, not going away anytime soon.
Huge total addressable market in a way, but not it's a type of a weird addressable market, but one that you want to provide solution for. My second question, you sort of already answered there, is what motivated you to want to search for this alternative health solution? So it's personal for you. This is something that you've been through, something that you've experienced. I had someone in my family who suffered from that as well. They didn't use psychedelics as a treatment, but I'm sure if they were to experiment, it would have worked. So now moving more towards the business side, you guys were one of the first, if not the first psychedelics company to go public. Since then, we've seen a plethora or a few companies go public, whether it be Field Trip, Compass Pathways, Numi. What does MindMed offer? What do you guys do different that's, or better than the competition?
Well, look, I think there are really sort of three industry leaders that are emerging in this space right now. MindMed is one of them. Compass Pathways just had its very successful IPO on the NASDAQ. We've just filed a NASDAQ uplisting application. And then you have another big company called Atai, which is private now and also planning to be listed on NASDAQ. I think what we do differently and how we approach this space is we have a very diverse pipeline. We're looking at multiple psychedelic substances and next generation substances and figuring out how we can get these into as many clinical trials and build out that pipeline. We think that's very, very important from a risk reward scenario to have. Some of these things are going to be binary outcomes. Some of them are going to be great and outstanding and be a very good thing for the company. Some of them won't be. That is drug development. Now, our additional approach, what I think differentiates us, and really as we create this new asset class of medicines, we're pioneering a new industry with these companies, we're seeking to change the paradigm upon which we treat mental health in America and globally. And so in order to do that, we think we're going to need to find innovative ways and scalable ways to get these medicines to as many people in America as possible. And so we're looking at digital therapeutics and digital platforms to eventually scale psychedelic assisted therapy and psychedelic medicines to those that are suffering.
All right. So like I was mentioning, you guys were one of the first companies to go public of psychedelics. You guys listed on the NEO exchange, which is a bit different than your competitor Compass Pathways, who recently listed on the NASDAQ. What was it like listing on the NEO? It's growing in popularity, but at the time, MindMed kind of put it on the map more so. What was that like?
Well, a lot of people told us no in the early days of MindMed, and even when I was, coming up with the blueprint for what became MindMed, psychedelic medicine was not the talk of the town back when we first were raising seed capital and even considering an exchange. In many ways, I think we pioneered the space so that institutional capital took it seriously, and that stock exchange took it seriously. I think most likely Compass, very much benefited from the fact that we became the first publicly listed company.
Oh, definitely.
And brought a lot of light and attention and eyeballs on the space. And so, I think it's going to be very interesting once we also get down to NASDAQ, subject to our application being granted.
Awesome. So you guys had news today. MindMed announced successful completion of pre-individual meeting with the FDA for Project Lucy. Project Lucy is investigating LSD as a treatment for anxiety. So my question is two-part question. What does LSD as a treatment for anxiety look like? Because LSD, in a way, people are programmed or it's stigmatized in a way as something that's bad, or it's a bad word. And my second question is the name Lucy, is it an homage to the Beatles?
Well, the Beatles are one of my favorite bands, and the favorite band of a lot of our team members. And Lucy in the Sky Diamonds definitely makes an homage to LSD. And so we were looking for a good name. We have Project Lucy for our anxiety program, but also we have Project Layla, which is 18MC and our opioid addiction or solving opioid addiction, the program that we're looking at there. But to come back to your question, it really, what Project Lucy is focused on is looking at the underlying cause of anxiety. Many of the substances and medicines that are on the market, like Xanax or benzos, in general, they mute your anxiety. They definitely can calm you down. They're great. They're also highly addictive. They've killed some of my friends. They We talk a lot about the opioid crisis. I think the next thing that we're going to start talking about is the Xanax crisis. And, that scares me. And so as someone who's suffered from anxiety, who's taken Xanax and, taken way too much of it, I can tell you that you need to solve the underlying issue that's causing it. There's always something beneath. And psychedelic medicine is not a panacea. It's not purporting to be a panacea. I think many people would like it to be, but you have to do the work. There has to be, you have to put in the time. Psychedelics are effectively just a catalyst to allow you to recalibrate your life, look at what you're doing, what patterns are creating these issues for you in your life. And it's assisted, psychedelic assisted therapy. You're doing this with a medical professional or therapist. And that's a key component. And so we're also looking at the pre-care and aftercare markets and how do we best help patients after that psychedelic experience. And so that will be a big component of what we ultimately believe we're going to commercialize with Project Lucy.
Okay, so here's a kind of a tough question with talking about getting to the root cause of anxiety, right? And we're talking about, say, the stigma of LSD causing, let's say if someone was to have, say, a double whammy effect to it with, say, already bad anxiety and then a bad trip on LSD. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, I think, having a bad trip on LSD isn't necessarily a bad thing. So in many ways, some of the most difficult trips that people have had have ultimately been the most beneficial to them.
And breakthrough moments.
Yeah, and breakthrough moments. Now, look, we're working on features to the medicines that we ultimately want to bring to market. And so we're working on something called an LSD neutralizer, which we announced many months ago, which is if the experience really just is too much for a patient and the therapist or medical professional is worried about the patient, they could stop the trip. And, this is not something that, you want to do. But we think that if you're going into your experience, the best thing that we can say to you is there is an emergency off ramp, and you should probably be more comfortable and have a little bit less anxiety going into that experience. And I think that's a key thing. The number one question that I receive from folks that are considering psychedelic assisted therapy or just want me to explain it is, well, what happens if I have a bad trip? And so if we can say to eventual customers or patients down the line, there is this off switch, I think it's going to have a lot more adoption within the psychiatric and medical community.
I think that's huge. And I think a lot of people just learning that will be advantage to them knowing that. So we mentioned 18-MC for the treatment of addiction for opioids. This is something I find super interesting. How can 18-MC exactly, I'm not saying fix the problem, but how can it be sort of part of the solution?
Well, look, opioid addiction and the opioid crisis cost America $700 billion a year. This is a big problem and it needs to be solved. I mean, it's killing a lot of people. It's affecting a lot of families, but it also has a massive impact on our economy. When we look at 18-MC, what we're really looking to address is something called the dysregulation of dopamine in your brain. So as an addict, and I was one of them, what happens is over time, your brain gets used to the high, that rush. And what we define high as is that dopamine rush.
Correct.
And so it's great for the first couple months, and you get those spikes. But what happens is over time, the dopamine level, or what we call our baseline dopamine in your brain, the normal amount, actually gets depleted and goes down. And so you are no longer using an addictive substance like an opioid or cocaine or alcohol to get high anymore. You're actually using it just to feel normal, just to bring that dopamine back in check. And so that's what 18-MC is really addressing. And so we hope that 18-MC is not a pill that you take for the rest of your life. It is not like methadone or Suboxone or any of these current solutions out there on the market that aren't really solutions, quite frankly. And what we hope 18-MC is to really become the antibiotic. You'll use it to get off a substance. We hope that you never have to use it again. But if you do fail and there is some form of a relapse, you could take it again. And I think that's a very powerful thing. As someone who's suffered from addiction, I can tell you Withdrawal is not the most difficult part of addiction. It is cue-induced relapse. It's seeing a rolled up dollar bill on my friend's counter during a party and people sneaking off to the bathroom. Those cues cause you to want that dopamine rush. If we can solve that problem, I think we have a very good chance at solving a terrible problem in society, which is addiction.
Fascinating. That's the way you word it is very well, and it seems like you have a solution for any possible negative that people are looking at within your presentation. So that's great. Another thing I'm kind of unfamiliar with is DMT and MDMA. Obviously, those have some DMT. I believe it's something to do with dreams, and MDMA is known as a party drug. But there's obviously some stigma around that, similar to with LSD and psilocybin. So once again, similar. How does that work? I know you have a few trials in your pipeline. How does that work? How does that look essentially?
So what we're looking at with MDMA is actually combining it with LSD, and the reason that we want to combine them into a single dosing is that we think that MDMA could make people more comfortable, open them up a little bit before they go into that psychedelic therapy session, and then the LSD is where you actually get the work done and the thinking done. And so we're now putting that in the first ever phase 1 trial. I believe that was it was broken by Vice News that we're conducting that phase 1 trial, and it's moving forward. We will be starting that trial. And when it comes to DMT, to answer your question around there, what we're looking at is how can we better control DMT within your body, and how can we do that through an infusion rather than just necessarily other forms that DMT is consumed in, and how do we prolong that process, maybe to do a similar experience to how ayahuasca is done.
There's a lot of popularity around ayahuasca in the trading communities these days as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was on the show Billions, right? It opened.
Yeah, exactly. You're looking for the shaman.
Circle with axe, there. So what we're looking at in those phase 1 trials is how do we better control it? Could we potentially delay the DMT dose so that it's not as intense? Things around that. So we're still in the early stages of that, but we're also looking at next generation molecules, that are not necessarily just the classic psychedelics. How do we move them into, I think classic psychedelics are going to open up the space and be a paradigm shift in how we treat mental health. But I also think that next generation molecules that we're working on will ultimately be more tailored maybe be more precise on how we treat certain mental illnesses.
All right. So just so no one gets spooked out on that former one where you said you're looking to combine LSD and MDMA to potential, you guys have no intention to ever do anything recreational. This is all pure medicinal therapeutic treatments, nothing to do recreational ever.
We are 100% focused on federal compliance and approaching these as drug development programs. We have no intent in the recreational market. I don't see really a recreational market having any legs right now. And we're just not interested in it. There's some massive problems in society that we need to solve. And as an entrepreneur, I've never seen a bigger opportunity in my entire career. And so we're going to focus on healing people.
You seem extremely passionate about it, and a whole new respect for you after getting to hear you talk about it. A few more questions for you before we end here. Everyone knows Kevin O'Leary is an investor in MindMed, early backer of MindMed, but also you have former CEO of Canopy Growth, Bruce Linton, on your board of directors. Just as sort of a young guy running a young company, is there a lot of pressure having such a high-profile board for such a young company?
It definitely creates for informed and heated debates at times, but I actually like it. I like to surround myself with people that challenge me, not that yes me to death. And Bruce always pushes me to find the best solution, and we really do value his opinion. And he's built some very big companies. I think at one point Canopy was a $20 billion company. We're not there yet. But I think with the right mentorship, we might end up there. Awesome.
Great answer. Well, final question. Any update on the NASDAQ listing upcoming?
I can't give you a date. What I can tell you is we're in the process. We filed the application. This is a high priority for me as CEO, and it's a high priority for our board. we look forward to updating in due course.
Awesome stuff. All right, JR, appreciate you coming on. Where can our followers follow you guys on social media and find you guys?
Well, the best place for that is at mindmed.co. That's our website, and all of our socials are on there. Look out for some great, news releases also on that website, and as we keep marching forward here on how we change the paradigm on mental health.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to having you on in the future, and best of luck with everything.
Thanks so much, man.
Awesome.